Hey everyone, in the previous video we have seen how short circuiting helps Python avoid unnecessary computations. In this video we are going to discuss two more interesting applications of short circuiting which are very often used while writing real-time Python programs. The first concept we are going to discuss is how to write safe conditional checks using short circuiting. Let's see this practical example to understand this. For this purpose I have created a new Python file with the name truthy_falsy_short-circuiting_2.py, and this is the problem statement we have. Let's say there is a course offered by a university. Now we need to write a program that takes student details and determines if the student is eligible to apply for the course or not. So here student_details, as the name suggests, contains the details of a student. And this student details can have either valid or invalid data. In invalid case, we might have none value or an empty list. And the valid case is when we have a non-empty list with three different details: name, age, and percentage. For example, if you take this particular list, here the first element will be the name of the student, second element will be the age of the student, and the third element will be the percentage of marks the student achieved. Now it is specified that for the student to be eligible for this course, the student's age has to be less than or equal to 25 and percentage of marks should be greater than or equal to 75. So here we have taken student details is equal to Sachin, 22 and 85. So this is a list. We are going to learn a lot about lists in future, but just to give you a basic idea, so list will have multiple elements and the indexing starts from 0, which means the first element will have index 0. The second element will have index 1, 2 and so on. And also sometimes for the sake of convenience, using index we can call this as 0th element, first element, second element. Alright. Now if we want to access the element at index 0, we will be using student_details of 0. We will be using a subscript of 0. And if you want to access the element at index 1, we will be using student_details of 1. Subscript will be 1. Similarly, when we want to access the element at index 2, we will be using student_details of 2. So what we want to do is we want to fetch age and percentage, which are at index 1 and 2 respectively, right? So we want to see age less than or equal to 25. So what we try to do is this will be student_details of 1 less than or equal to 25. So here we are checking if age is less than or equal to 25 and then student_details of 2 greater than or equal to 75. So here we are checking if percentage is greater than or equal to 75. If both these are satisfied, we are going to print you are eligible to apply for the course. If any of these conditions fail, this will be false and so it will print you are not eligible to apply for the course. So what happens for this particular input? So student details of 1, 22 less than or equal to 25, this is true, 22 is less than 25, right? And student details of 2 greater than or equal to 75. So we have 85 greater than or equal to 75. This is also satisfied, both of them are true. So the overall condition will be true. So it should print you are eligible to apply for the course. Let's run this program. Right click, run. And you can see it prints you are eligible to apply for the course. This code might look perfectly fine, but there is a problem with this. Because when we write a program, our program has to handle all the possible inputs. Now here in the invalid case, we might have none value or empty list. For the sake of example, let's take an empty list. Now what happens? Here in this list we don't have any elements at all, but we are trying to access the element at index 1 and element at index 2, which are not present because the list is empty. So this will throw you an error. Let me run this program and see. So as you can see, it gives you an error that list index out of range, because in this list we don't even have element at index 0 and you are trying to access element at 1 and 2. Right? So it throws you index error. And what happens if it is none? Let's see that also. Basically, this subscript is used when you want to access a particular element in a sequence or collection. like a list or a string, etc. But here none object is not a sequence or collection. It's just a single object with none value. So you can't use this kind of subscript with none object. This will also throw you an error. Let me run this program and show you. So as you can see, it says none type object is not subscriptable. So to avoid these kind of errors, what we need to do is we need to add a check in the beginning to see if the data is valid or not. So what I can do is if student details, and then I'll add these two conditions. Now what happens? Now if you see this if condition, this is the first operand and this expression is the second operand and this expression is the third operand. And all these operands are connected with logical operator AND. Now how does AND operator work? So when Python tries to evaluate the expression from left to right, as soon as it sees the first falsy value, it will return that value without evaluating any further. Now let's say all these three operands are truthy, then it will return the value of the last operand, which will be some truthy value, right? Whatever is the value of the last operand. To put it very simply, if all these operands are truthy, the overall condition value becomes truthy. Now we know that if it is truthy, it will execute the code inside the if block. And in case if at least one of these operands is falsy, the overall expression value becomes falsy. And when this condition evaluates to a falsy value, it will execute the code inside the else block. Or else if we also have elif statements, once this condition gives a falsy value, it will go to the next elif condition. We already know how if elif else statements work. But in this case, we don't have elif statements. So once this condition gives a falsy value, it will go and execute the else block. Now let's see what happens if we have some invalid value like empty list or none. Let's take empty list first. Now what happens? Python will try to evaluate this expression from left to right. So first it evaluates this. So student underscore details is an empty list, which is a falsy value. As soon as it sees a falsy value without evaluating the rest of the operands, it will simply return that falsy value. And so it will not evaluate these two expressions and we will not get any index errors. Because as soon as it sees a falsy value, it will simply return that falsy value. It will not evaluate any further. Now this overall expression value will be a falsy value and it will go and execute the code inside the else block and it should print you are not eligible to apply for the course. Let's run the program and verify. As you can see, it prints you are not eligible to apply for the course and we did not get any error. Same is the case when we have none value. Even none is a falsy value. So when Python evaluates this expression from left to right, as soon as it sees this falsy value, it will simply return this falsy value without evaluating the rest of the expressions. And that's why we will not get any errors. Even in this case, because this is falsy, it will execute this particular statement. Let's run this program and verify again. As you can see, it prints you are not eligible to apply for the course. Now let's see what happens when we have some valid data, like in this case. Now Python first evaluates this operand, which is a non-empty list, which is a truthy value. And so it goes to the next expression as well. And it will try to evaluate this. So here student details of 1 is 22, 22 less than or equal to 25 is true. And this will evaluate to true. True is also a truthy value. So we got a truthy value and so it will go and execute the last expression as well. And here 85 greater than or equal to 75, this is also true. So it will also return a truthy value, which is true in this case. So all these operands are truthy. That's why the overall condition becomes truthy and it will execute you are eligible to apply for the course. So let me run this program now. As you can see, it now prints you are eligible to apply for the course. So as you can understand, Python will evaluate these two expressions only in case student details is a truthy value. Because if it is a falsy value, it will simply short circuit, right? That's why it will not execute the rest of the expressions. So this is why we call this as safe conditional checks. Now let's also take a scenario where we have valid data, but the student is not meeting the requirement. Let's say age of the student is 30. Now what happens? So it evaluates from left to right. Student details is a truthy value, so it will also go to the next operand. So when it tries to evaluate this, 30 less than or equal to 25 is false. So false is a falsy value. As soon as it sees a falsy value, it will simply return that value. So this overall condition will now become falsy and it will simply execute you are not eligible to apply for the course. Let's verify this as well. Right click, run, and it says you are not eligible to apply for the course. And also the position of this check is really important. It needs to be there before accessing the elements of the list. I hope that makes sense to you. So this is how we can write safe conditional checks by handling invalid data. And the second concept we are going to discuss in this video is fallback pattern. Again, this is something you will very often find in real-time Python projects. Let's see this example to understand about this. So here we have a variable name with value Sachin. Now what we want to do is, if the name is valid, like Sachin in this case, we want to use that name as the display name. If the name is not valid, like empty list or none, we want to use a default name guest. So how we can do it is, we can create a variable display underscore name and we assign name or guest. So what happens here? Let's assume the name is valid like Sachin. So Python tries to evaluate this from left to right and we have OR operator here. And now this non-empty string will be a truthy value, right? When you have a non-empty string, it will be truthy value. So when it comes to OR operator, as soon as it sees a truthy value, it will simply return that value. So display name will take this value Sachin. That's why it will print welcome Sachin. So let me run this program and verify. Right click, run. You can see welcome Sachin. Now what happens if name is some invalid value like empty string or none? Now Python tries to evaluate this from left to right. So it will evaluate the first operand name, which is a falsy value. And so it will go to the next operand. Only in case of falsy, it will go to the next operand. And the second operand is a truthy value. It is a non-empty string, right? So it is truthy. So that will be returned and it is assigned to display name. So now this will print welcome guest. Let me run this program and see. Right click, run. It prints welcome guest. Same is the case if we have none value as well, because this is falsy. So it goes to the next operand and this will be truthy and so it will return that. So what are we trying to achieve here? If the name is valid, we are assigning that name to display name. But if it is not valid like empty string or none, we are asking it to fall back on this default value guest. That's why we call this as fallback pattern. We can also do it without using this syntax. Let me show you how. So what we want to do is, if name is valid, which means if it is truthy, we want to assign display name is equal to name, right? That's what we are doing here as well. Else, if it is falsy like empty string, we want to assign a value guest to this display name. What happens in this case? If the name is valid, this will be truthy and so name will be assigned to display name. If it is empty, so this will be falsy and so it goes to the else block and guest will be assigned to display name. But the same can be done very simply using the concept of short circuiting. With this, we have discussed everything about truthy, falsy values and short circuiting. In the next tutorial, let's discuss another new topic. I'll see you soon.